Have you ever looked at your lab work, seen the word normal, and felt your stomach drop because nothing about the way you feel is normal? Your energy's off, your cycle has changed, your sleep is worse, your mood is different, your body is clearly trying to tell you something, and still, somehow, the conclusion is that everything looks fine. That is the part so many women are living through quietly. Not because their symptoms are not real, but because the answers they are being given don't match what they're experiencing in their body. And after enough appointments like that, it becomes very easy to start doubting yourself. So in this episode of the Ovary Club, my guest is Dr. Carrie Jones, and we are opening up that conversation in a way that I think is going to be deeply validating for a lot of women. Dr. Carrie Jones was the first medical director of the Dutch test and has spent more than 2 decades in clinical practice focused on women's hormonal health, which is exactly why this conversation is so important. We get into why normal labs can still miss very real hormone issues, how the timing of your test can completely change what your results show, and which markers actually deserve more attention if you want a clearer picture of what is going on in your body. If you've ever been told everything looks fine while feeling anything but, this episode is going to help you understand exactly where that disconnect is happening and what questions to start asking instead. If you've been listening to this show, you know I don't believe in one-size-fits-all solutions because your body isn't one-size-fits-all. That's why we created Flow Living to support your hormones with both targeted supplements and the cycle syncing methodology. It's about giving your body what it needs when it needs it so you can feel more balanced, more energized, and more like yourself throughout the month. If you're ready to try it, you can get 25% off with the code podcast25 at flowliving.com. Hey, Dr. Carrie, it's so great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining the Ovary Club as our very first guest. We're so thrilled to have you and really excited for our chat today.
I feel like with the Ovary Club, we need jackets. Do we need matching jackets? Like the merch will be unreal.
I have some plans for the merch. I feel like this is it's just the continuation of the period club that I started in 6th grade. So, period club has grown up. Now we're the Ovary Club. It's just for every woman, whether you have a period or not, really.
I love that.
I'm excited to talk to you. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on as our very first guest is because, we're here in the Ovary Club to really learn about how our body actually works, not to be guessing, not to be following trends, but to really be using the science to make our bodies optimized as women in a very gender-specific way, like saying no to the biohacks that work for guys and saying yes to really understanding our biology. And I just have loved everything that you have been talking about for years around testing and knowing your biometrics and your levels. And I really wanted to bring that perspective as our very first guest to our audience. So I'm going to ask you a ton of questions today, and we're all eager to hear your deep insights. So let me get started. I think this is a common challenge for women. I know I hear it in my practice all the time. It's like, my labs are fine. And you've built your whole career around women who feel terrible but get told their labs are fine. So please tell us, what is actually going on when that happens? Is it the wrong labs, the wrong interpretation, both, something else? Lay it on us.
I feel like the answer is just generally yes. Yes. I remember years ago, a good girlfriend of mine had texted me and she said all this horrible PMS, horrible periods. She was premenopausal, so she was in her early 30s, and I said, well, did you get your progesterone checked? She said, yes, it's normal. That can't be it. I said, well, when did you get your progesterone checked? And she said, last Tuesday. I said, no, where in your cycle did you get it checked? And she said, I don't know. I think it was like day 5 or 6 of my period. And I was like, oh, and of course, she got the message in her portal that was like, we got your labs back. Everything is normal. Her progesterone was quite low, understandably, which fit the reference range for somebody who's day 5 or 6 of their period. So one of the key things, I know you see this all the time, is when to order hormone testing. It's very cycle specific. And
we're definitely getting there. That is definitely a question.
But I also find the what. I would have patients say, I asked I asked my primary care, I asked my OBGYN for a full workup. I want all the hormones tested. And they'll run like a CBC, which is called a complete blood count, red and white blood cells. Do you have an infection? They'll run a metabolic panel. So electrolytes, liver, glucose, and they might run a TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And that's, like the bare minimum. And they're like, that's it.
Considered complete.
And that's considered complete. And they're like, they told me my hormones were normal. And I was like, well, you don't have an infection and your glucose is fine and your electrolytes and liver are fine. But where's the rest of it? And I think there's just this misunderstanding or like miseducation when it comes to how to properly work up somebody who is still getting her cycle. And then as a result, they just rely on ranges and call it good.
It's so frustrating. And I know that so many women feel like they're doing everything to try to help themselves. And they go and they spend the time and get the blood work done. And then they just come back with this very frustrating result. So in what you're saying, sometimes it is the wrong test.
Yes.
And you have to understand how to advocate for yourself. So let's dive into this other problem that I think exists outside of not getting the right testing, and we're going to talk about timing in a second, is standard lab reference ranges were largely built on male biology. We don't agree on anything, obviously, you and I. Okay, so standard lab reference ranges, they're built on these, male biological reference points. When women whose hormones are running on a 28-day cycle, why would you say that's such a fundamental mismatch? And what does that mean, let's say, in practice when you're looking at labs?
Well, I mean, not only that, but a lot of reference ranges for everything are built on the people who go to the lab. So if it's unhealthy people who don't feel well, then the reference ranges, they do skew over time. They do have to adjust them over time. And if the society is getting sicker or more disease, more blood sugar issues, everyone is low vitamin D, et cetera, they'll start skewing the reference ranges, or they'll have these really large reference ranges. And so when we looked at the early research, of course, women, as you know, weren't included in research till the early 90s. So
and even after that mandate,
not even after
still
that,
not going well.
So they were like, cool, here's this cholesterol, for example, here's this glucose, here's a thyroid. We will just lay the same reference range for all of this and not even recognize the menstrual cycle and its role in a lot of these hormones. Like I remember a couple decades ago when somebody said to me, well, the thyroid marker, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, it can increase also at ovulation. And I was like, oh, duh, why didn't I think of that? Cortisol there's a awakening response, cortisol awakening response goes up at ovulation. I say all the time, it's like if anyone's been to Las Vegas or seen the movie with the Bellagio fountains and they all go up, that's ovulation. Everything goes up at ovulation. So do other markers. So if you're getting even your thyroid checked at different parts of your cycle, you may get different results. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with you. It's just your body's responding like a fountain. Everything goes off at ovulation. And so by taking reference ranges designed not for us, and then not including the physiology of our cycle, which is a large reason we were left out of research. One, they didn't want to research in case we wanted to get pregnant. Two, they couldn't take our menstrual cycle into account. Then awkward, like, come on, we're half the population. And then half of that are usually cycling. So I think we deserve reference ranges that apply to us.
That's a passion point of mine,
I
obviously. As the creator of the cycle syncing method, I just couldn't stand another day going by where we weren't really saying, hey, there's a line in the sand. We have different realities at different phases of the cycle. We have to factor those in. So it's great to hear some of the nuances around even other hormones beyond estrogen and progesterone, following that rhythmic pattern.
Yeah.
Women can't hear that enough because, we've been conditioned to just think that we're the same every day, and we're really not. And it really does factor into when you get your labs done. So,
yeah. I mean, even glucose, right? Like I have a non-medical colleague who put a continuous glucose monitor on. She was like, I'm killing it. I'm doing great. Excellent. And then all of a sudden she said, I'm like pre-diabetic. I don't know what happened. I just switched. I said, by chance, did you go into your luteal phase? By chance.
By chance?
Are you after ovulation? And now your fasting glucose is like about 100? And she's like, yes. And I said, yeah, it's It's biology. It's your body is redirecting glucose resources, making it more available in case you get pregnant. Doesn't mean you want to get pregnant,
And
but
not only that, but also just to build up, no big deal, just to 3D print that organelle, called the endometrium.
yeah,
No biggie.
I mean, no big deal. I know.
We don't need an improved metabolism at that time for that.
And the glucose to power it up. And so,
right.
but she had no idea, of course. Nobody teaches you. So then everyone's like, oh, I'm going to try the biohacks harder. I'm going to do more fasting. I'm going to do more calorie cutting. I'm going to do more, more exercise to get my blood sugar down. I'm like, oh.
And it works against our biology. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You talk a lot about the difference between a result being in range and then it actually being optimal for that woman. So if you'd look, I'd love to hear you break that down, because I think a lot of women don't understand that they're two different things.
And this is why I advocate for getting lab testing young. Early, like when you feel, and getting lab testing when you feel your best, which of course is not when you think to get your blood work done or any kind of hormone test or any test at all. Usually you get it when you feel the worst, but I want to know where you also are when you feel your best. So testosterone is a really great example that I give. We have a range of testosterone. Some women are like, I feel the best at the upper quadrant, higher end of the range of testosterone. I know that in their 20s, I know that in their 30s, and all of a sudden they hit perimenopause and they drop down. Now they're still in range, but they've dropped down, which happens. It can happen. But what will happen is they will go see their doctor, not me, and their doctor goes, well, you're in range. I don't see what the problem is. You don't need more testosterone. But yet she's like, I'm tired. I'm not building muscle. I have no libido. I'm not as motivated. Like, I feel like I just lost power. And I'm like, oh, I know you felt better at the higher end of range. And now dropping halfway or even closer to the lower end of range, you are still in range. You are not in the range for you. The iron marker ferritin is another great example. The ferritin reference range is huge, huge. It used to be, it was like all the years I practiced, it was like 15 to 100. Like that's a massive range. But I would have doctors say to me, well, she's 17, she's in range. 17, are we waiting 2 more points till she falls off the cliff and then we'll do something about it? She's tired, she's losing her hair, she's pale, she's out of breath. Let's find out why she's losing, like what's going on with her ferritin and her iron, versus the opposite side as well. Well, you're 98. You're not at 100 yet. What are we waiting for? Why is her iron so high? Does she have an iron storage condition? Does she have a lot of inflammation? Why are we waiting for somebody to fall off the cliff? Let's pull them back from the ledge.
Well, and that's fundamentally the difference between conventional and functional, which is another value add. But I want to just underline what you just said. And, I've said this as well. You've got to be testing your hormones throughout your lifespan.
Yeah.
Don't wait till there's a crisis. I think what you just said, Dr. Carrie, if you're listening, if you're in your 20s, go get some blood work just for fun. Just see where you're at. Don't wait till there's a problem, because as she said, knowing what your normal is versus what is quote unquote in normal range is going to serve you so much better than just relying on those ranges. And I think that's gold.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just circle back to the timing now. Finally, let's not leave anybody waiting. But timing is everything with women's labs, and almost nobody talks about this. So walk us through why testing on the wrong day of your cycle can essentially make results meaningless.
Oh my gosh. Well, the good thing is you have an entire book about cycle syncing. So there's a whole
you can look at where you understand where
Yes.
you are in your cycle for sure.
There's a lot of visual out there that she has covered, but you will get told, oh, we don't test hormones because your hormones change every day. So what's the point? I'm like, but except we know what hormones are doing every day. And we know when you get your period, your hormones are estrogens and progesterone are generally pretty low. And progesterone stays low through the entire first part of your cycle, the follicular phase, until you hit ovulation. Once you ovulate or release the egg, the cells left over magically turn into something called a corpus luteum, and that will start pumping out progesterone a day or two later. So when we want to check progesterone, I want to make sure that it's in the appropriate time after ovulation in the luteal phase. In general, we say 5 to 7 days after ovulation. So you do have to know if you ovulate or not, track some other symptoms maybe, but that's the timing. And I mentioned my friend earlier who was like, I don't know, it was a Tuesday. I think I was still bleeding. Of course, her progesterone would be near 0. That is biologically normal, but that's not what we're looking for. You and I are looking to see, like, what's your progesterone doing? Did you make any? Did you ovulate? How high does it get? And I need that in the second half of the cycle. And because nobody likes to get their blood drawn very often, we generally lump other hormones at that time as well. I know you get a second rise of estrogen at this point, so I'm going to check your estradiol. I know I'm away from ovulation, so when I'm looking at thyroid, I'm going to look at thyroid here, which is probably more what you look like most of your cycle, except for around ovulation. I'm still going to check your glucose and insulin here. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm still going to check those iron markers here. So we usually do kind of a bigger wallop of blood work or any kind of testing at this part of your cycle. Now, for those of you listening, maybe you're perimenopausal or menopausal, maybe you're trying to get pregnant and you want to run a hormone called FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. That one we actually do at the beginning. We do it around days 2, 3, 4, somewhere in there. And we will add on an estrogen here as well called estradiol again. So, and you and I see this, I will get a bunch of lab work back and there's an FSH. And I'm like, what day of the cycle were you on? And they're like, I don't know. It's just part of my panel. What? I mean, we know that FSH ideally is tested in that early part of the cycle, and there's a reason for it. But if that's not taught and your practitioner is just like, just go to the lab. Oh, you're here today. Just go to the lab, walk over to the lab and get your blood drawn. Why would you spend all that money? Why would you spend time? And you didn't know, but like now that we're educating you, now you're going to say to your practitioner, oh, actually, I'm only on day 10 of my cycle. Can I come back in like 10 days? Can I make sure I ovulate and come back when it's appropriate? Can you give me a slip, an order for the blood work? And I have more and more and more people on social media who DM me or comment, and they're like, I stood up for myself and I said, I'm at the wrong part of my cycle. I'm going to actually come back and get that blood drawn.
Oh, I
and their
love
practitioner
that.
was like, for what? You're here. Just it's like, oh my gosh. So timing is important. That's the long and short of it.
No, and let's just underscore a couple things. If you're trying to conceive, if you're perimenopausal, you want to go in on that day 2 or 3 at most of your cycle so you can get that FSH level. And if you're just cycling and you want to understand why you're having PMS, how's everything going just in general, that's when you want to go on day 5 or 7 after ovulation. So we can check peak progesterone levels and just sort of check all the other hormones at the same time. So it's great to think about that in reference to life stage and goal.
Yes.
Because women get really confused. They're like, well, I thought it was day 2. I hear that all the time. I thought I had to go on day 2. I said, well, what are you trying to accomplish? Are we trying to get pregnant, or are we just trying to check general hormones for general wellness? And I think that's a really useful frame that I haven't heard people talking about. So that's amazing. Now, listen, I'm going to just throw in one other thought here.
Yes.
Before we get into like the nitty gritty about what women should actually be testing, I want to just talk about the distinction between let's say the mismatch between a single blood draw.
Yes.
And the fact that our hormones are dynamic throughout a 28-day cycle. So can you talk to me about what you think outside of blood work? We're going to obviously talk about the Dutch test in a little bit, but what do you think is a better test than blood testing? Or is it sufficient?
So this is what I tell people. I have a long history, of course, working for the Dutch test, which is, again, a single day urine test, which we'll get into. I, like you, also love the at-home everyday urine test you can use, such as Mira, where we can see our hormones change through the month. And the blood test is, again, it's a one-day snapshot. Not only a one day, it's in that moment. What is your estradiol, your progesterone, your testosterone doing at that exact point at 7 a.m. when you went to the lab fasting? Like, that's the only information that I get out of it. And what people don't realize is that hormones work off a pulse. They're not like a garden hose that just turns on and goes. So when you ovulate and you're pumping out progesterone, it's literally a pump. It's like a pump and then we wait. And then a pump and we wait. It's not like open up the garden hose and just blast it full all over the body.
Right.
So we may miss the pump. We may miss that pulse at 7 a.m. But we don't know when it's going to come. And that's what makes it tricky. So some people go, oh my gosh, I got my blood drawn and it was low or it was high. I'm like, well, I don't know if it was all day, yesterday, tomorrow. I don't know if it looks the same. This is why there's some drawbacks to a one-day test. Great for quick snapshot things, absolutely. Covered by insurance, easy and routine, often considered the gold standard. But if you are really trying to dial in your hormones, whether you're trying to get pregnant, whether you're trying to manage perimenopause, even, as you get closer into menopause and you're skipping cycles, you've PCOS, then we want to be tighter in what we're looking at. I want to see more the forest and less an individual tree. Your estrogen, estradiol at 7 a.m. on this one day is great, but what was it the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? What's it tomorrow and the days leading after that? And that's why I'm loving that women have so many more options now to really see that information.
Yeah. I mean, we experience hormones over time. And so having additional testing that we can get that insight of what's happening every day, any day of our cycle is so valuable. And more information is better when you're trying to know your body and trying to decipher why do you have specific symptoms at a specific phase of your cycle. That's really helpful. So I love that perspective. All right, so let's get into what you feel women actually need to be testing. So if a woman walked into your office tomorrow and had never had a proper hormonal workup, which by the way is many women.
So common.
So it's so common. What do you think is the non-negotiable starting panel? Where do you always begin?
So I always begin, and I usually do the general after ovulation in the luteal phase. So we'll do estradiol, progesterone, total and free testosterone. I do DHEA-S, so there is a DHEA with no S and a DHEA with an S. S stands for sulfate. I generally do the DHEA-S because it doesn't follow a circadian rhythm, meaning you don't have to check it in the morning. If you don't want to, you can check it when you hit the lab. So that's sort of like a nice baseline, but there are a lot of other hormones out there. So I always do a full thyroid panel, which is TSH that I mentioned earlier, but the free hormones, free T4, free T3. I do check for antibodies for autoimmune thyroid. And the reason for that is, unfortunately, women have a much higher propensity to develop autoimmune thyroid, especially when we hit big transitions in our life that start with P. So puberty, pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and menopause. And a lot of women that I see and talk with now are at the perimenopause. But before, I used to see a lot of pregnancy, postpartum women that were like, what's wrong with my thyroid? I'm like, ooh, we have to get this worked up. Then I will look at nutrients such as iron. I like an iron panel on women. I find that iron is an easy one that gets missed all the time.
So overlooked, so important.
Yes. I look at even B12, vitamin D. I do look at that red and white blood cell called a CBC, complete blood count. I do look at a comprehensive metabolic panel, glucose, electrolytes, liver, things like that. I add in a fasting insulin because unfortunately, I think it was the NIH or some studies came out that said 93% of Americans are metabolically not that healthy, and insulin can be a really great indicator of that, especially as the insulin reference range right now, going back to reference ranges, is quite large. It's like 2, depending what lab you go to, it's like 2 to 18 or 2 to 20. And a lot of research is pointing towards anything over 10. Functionally, we tend to say anything over 7, a fasting insulin over 7, indicates a strong indication for metabolic syndrome is going to develop or is well on its way. So why would I wait till you get to 18? I'm going to catch it long before then.
Yeah.
Then we do lipids because women need to know at a young age, at all ages, what their lipids are doing. So that's cholesterol, like a cholesterol, for example, LDL, HDL, triglycerides. And then kind of depending on her age, I'll add in more advanced lipids. So if she's over 40, for sure, I'm going to look at some of the other heart markers, just unfortunately, because heart disease is really common in perimenopause. That's when it starts to really develop. And heart disease is the number 1 killer of humans. So that's kind of my general. Now I can add other things in. We mentioned FSH earlier, but in LH as well. But when it really just comes to what's my standard? What am I looking? That's usually what I run.
I love that. It gives you such a great picture of where you're at, how you're doing. Do you add in any inflammatory markers typically, or do you like to wait to see after this first panel?
It depends on her symptoms. So if she is over 40, I will usually run what's called an HS-CRP, and we want that to be below 1. which is generally, that's the reference range. You want it below 1. It's not a specific inflammatory marker, meaning it doesn't tell me where in the body or what's causing it, but it does give me an indication of like, ruh-roh, we've got the body's on fire. We got to figure this out. If you're younger than 40 and you're quite inflamed, I will add it for sure. So if you're younger than 40 and I'm like, man, you are always in pain or a puffy mess or already have autoimmune that we're trying to get under control and just things like that, I'm like, yes, I think we need to run a CRP on you.
That's great. I think that's an important biomarker for women to understand as well, just because inflammation and its impact on our ovarian health is quite profound and
huge.
And we need to know what's going on, and our stress levels aren't helping us, nor are our diets. So it's a good one to check.
Our diets, yes. Especially as we talk about, I mean, I remember years ago, I read an article about ovarian aging, like inflammaging, but of the ovaries. And it was a theory back then. And I was like, oh no, this makes so much sense. They're sensitive. They have a lot of blood flow and lymphatic flow to them. It makes sense that they're going to hit pretty hard. They are on the move all the time, creating these hormones, growing these follicles. And at the time, this was probably, 2017, I want to say. And so many people were like, no, that's not, it's just a theory, Carrie. Well, now we've shown several times over that, yes, those poor little ovaries, the inflammation can hit them extra hard, age us faster, affect our fertility, affect our ability to make hormones. I mean, yes.
And that is what we are talking about in the Ovary Club. How do we protect our ovaries, our little powerhouses that give us so much that we completely have no understanding of really what they're doing and how to support them. So I love what you just said. It's so important. Okay, let's talk about some of the ones. I want to just drill down into a couple of the things that never get ordered for most women. And you mentioned it earlier in the ones that you would love to typically add when you start with someone. But let's dial down around fasting insulin. It's a big one for you, I know, as you mentioned, but why should every woman over 40 be getting this tested? And what are doctors missing by leaving it off the panel?
It's so odd to me, given the amount of research on insulin, elevated insulin, and trajectory of health, longevity, chronic disease, metabolic syndrome. The research I've read talking about the level of insulin, I mentioned over 10, a fasting insulin level over 10 is often linked to like predictive of diabetes, prediabetes, predictive of what's coming with metabolic syndrome, which is not a good thing. It's not what you want. And as women get older and their hormones start shifting, estradiol starts to drop down, we become more insulin resistant, which is not a good thing. You want to be insulin sensitive. So automatically by age, we trend towards insulin resistance. If you're already there due to stress, diet, lifestyle, genetics, etc., it's not going to get much easier as you're over 40. And because it's not run very often, unless you have PCOS, unless you've already been told you are type 2 diabetic or even type 1 diabetic, then it's commonly forgotten or brushed aside is not a typical lab to run. And I find it gives me so much information around inflammation. The higher insulin is, generally the more inflammation you have. It tells me a lot about your ability to gain and lose weight. It tells me a lot about your ability with energy, how your mitochondria are going to function, your mitochondria being your cellular powerhouses, but also you make your steroid hormones in your mitochondria. It's the first step for estradiol. Well, all your estrogens, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol.
It's even the rate limiting step. Yes.
Oh my gosh. And so just knowing somebody's insulin, fasting insulin, and you have so much control over it. That's what I love. If your insulin's high or higher than we want functionally, you're not doomed. You're not required to go on a medication, but we have a lot we can do from a diet and lifestyle function, the exercise, movement, stress reduction to get it back into a healthy range. And that's really empowering.
I think it's nice because when people see a data point in black and white, especially women, we're really motivated to improve that score. And sometimes when there's a struggle with the relationship with carbohydrate consumption, right? Having a goalpost, a destination, saying, okay, I'm going to get this fasting insulin level down. I want to do it in the course of a few months. That really can help with the everyday behavior modification that you have to do. That can sometimes, when you don't have that goal, feel like, well, I'll just eat this brownie today and then I'll think about that another day. Like you'll be starting to think about it more regularly. And that's really what it takes to be successful with managing your sugar and your weight over time. But also just that connection between insulin and hormones. I'm a former PCOS sufferer and I've been obese, and, have managed this all naturally in over my lifespan so far. The relationship between carbohydrate consumption, insulin, and your ovulation is so profound. And even if you don't have PCOS, it is absolutely impacting that. And we've got to be, recognizing and supporting or understanding the connection between our diet and our hormones much more than we do. I think we tend to think of our hormones very passively, like, well, they're just happening and there's nothing I can do to interact with them, which, you and I both know is not the case. And I think that's why testing is so powerful, to understand that when you go to your physician and you're saying, I just don't feel well, there's so many symptoms I'm having, cycle related and otherwise, and you look at these labs, you can start to connect the dots around, wow, all of these things do connect back to my symptoms and I have to do something about it.
Yes. And I not only do I love that it's almost like holding a mirror up. When you, like you said, when you see it in black and white, and a lot of women, not all, but a lot of women, especially as they hit over 40, they're like, okay, I need to make some changes. And they're usually that type A go-getter, I can do this. And then I'm like, you absolutely can do this. You can make changes in just a few short months. It's not rocket science. It's not huge, crazy lifts. It's not wild out diets. It's
definitely not extreme dude-related biohacks.
No, we won't have you do like 72-hour fast and then jump in a cold bath.
Cold
that's
plunges.
Not what we're saying. Yeah, the cold plunge. You don't know.
But it is that daily habit stacking
Yes.
and consistently over time that, creates the delta with your health. And it's not sexy and but it is really effective. So
yes.
But I like a less is more approach. And I find as a type A personality myself, that's very helpful for my stress load. Like I don't have to do that much, but I do have to do a couple things consistently. All right, let's talk about cortisol, speaking of stress, because that's another one that's often tested in a way that tells you almost nothing.
Yeah.
What's the problem with a single morning blood cortisol and what do you actually want to see instead?
A single morning blood cortisol is a total cortisol, and cortisol is free. And our hormones, we have very few hormones that are free and available. The free hormones, though, are what bind to receptors and do the thing. And then the rest of it, because they're like children, they can't be unattended at any time, we put on a binding globulin or a protein bus of some sort and drive it through the bloodstream. So when you get a total cortisol, it is a combination of what's free and available and what is bound up on a bus. But unfortunately, let's say you get your blood drawn in the morning and it's 15. I don't know if that's 14 free and 1 bound up, which means you've got a lot of free, or 1 free and 14 bound up, which means you're not very much free.
And you had a hard time getting to that lab.
Yes, you were tired.
You were tired.
But what you'll get told is, oh, your morning cortisol is 15. That's well within range. You're fine. You're good. And you're like, meanwhile, I feel terrible, or I feel anxious and revved up and I can't sleep, depending when you are. And so it misses the mark. Now, the blood cortisol is helpful for the extremes. If it's outright high or outright low, we may have to do more investigation into something called Cushing's or Addison's. But that middle gray area, it doesn't tell me a whole lot. I need more advanced testing.
What do you want to be tested? How do you like to do that?
So I like to do it, we keep a couple options. So I like to do it through the day, but nobody likes to get their blood drawn through the day. So that's where I like the more functional advanced hormone testing, where you collect urine, for example, on waking, a couple hours later, around dinner and before bed, or you do saliva in the same thing, on waking, a couple hours later, around dinner and before bed, to give us the circadian rhythm.
Do you see any difference in terms of accuracy between the urine and the saliva for cortisol?
I don't. The only difference is that there's a shift, meaning when you do a saliva test, so you spit in a tube or suck on a cotton swab, it's immediate. So that's the free cortisol that's in your saliva, and it'll tell you right then and there. Whereas when you make cortisol and then it has to go through, goes through the tissues. It has to go to the kidney and then come out in the urine. There is about a 2-hour shift. So your waking point represents your cortisol through the night. So the accuracy is there. It's just a little bit different in how we look at it.
How you read the
time
results.
delay versus like absolute right in front of you.
I have to say, the spitting into those little vials is very
gross,
not fun. It's just like you look at it, you're like, oh, it's a little tiny thing, and then you're like, oh my God, how much do I have to spit into this tiny tube? It takes forever. So the cotton swabs are better, but I mean, I just think from an ease of use, even though there's that time delay, I think the urine is just easier because you're always urinating, and it's like, okay, no big deal. But the spitting into the vial, very
and
not
the bubbles
user
don't count, so you just spit, and then you need to like tap it down to get the bubbles down.
And it takes like 15 minutes, and that adds to my cortisol load, and I'm just not into it. So
I know.
I'm glad that you have officially said that they're both okay. That's helpful
they're
for
both
all
okay.
of us who like to test.
If you've ever wanted to ask me your own hormone questions, the Ovary Club Insiders is where you can do that. You'll get access to private podcast episodes where I answer real member questions with clear, science-backed guidance you can actually use. Join us at alisavidi.com/insiders.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's dial in thyroid a bit. It's obviously, we've talked about it a couple of times, but so many women struggle with thyroid. And I love that reference of the P's throughout the different hormonal inflection points that you have across your lifespan. They also, women, I think, definitely tend to think of this hormone first when things feel off. They suspect maybe that their thyroid is off, and they want to be investigating it with their practitioner or physician. But they kind of get a lab like, hey, your TSH is fine. You're good to go home, be on your way, go back to your normal life. But what does a genuinely useful thyroid panel look like? I mean, we've talked about all of these things. I would say, let's recap the different labs that you like to run, and maybe some key ranges would be helpful.
Yeah, and I'll explain. So TSH, probably everybody listening has had that drawn at least once. So TSH is the communication from your brain, the pituitary part of your brain, down to your thyroid. And that's thyroid stimulating hormone. The range is like 0.5 to 4.5, depending on your lab. Functionally, we generally like it somewhere in the like 1 to 2.5 range, sort of generally depending on your health. Then,
and again, knowing what that has been historically for you is so helpful.
Oh, so helpful.
Because, 1.5 to 2.4, that is a big range. And if you're always in the pocket at 1.7 or 1.8, and then all of a sudden you jump up to 2.4, you might not feel as energized as you had been. And even though it's okay, it's not optimal for you. So I do think, again, going back to what you taught us earlier, having those historical lab references for yourself, what's normal for you, very critical, especially with TSH.
Huge. And nowadays with technology and all these apps and platforms and portals and things, we can track over time. So if you haven't been, definitely try to find your old lab work, start trying to track it, plot it, look at it to see over the years, what are these markers doing? Because that's also quite eye-opening for a lot of people when they're like, wait a minute, 10 years ago, this is what I was, and no wonder I feel like crap. Like here's where I'm at in these certain markers. And I think that can be really helpful. And it's data you can show your physician to say, look, here's where I was and here's where I'm at. No wonder I don't feel good.
What if somebody were to say to this line of thought, just to play devil's advocate, well, Dr. Carrie, isn't it normal for some of these lab reference ranges to change as we age? Like, why would I want to assume that at 45, I could have the hormone levels of someone at 25? Is that even realistic? And so why should I look backwards? Why shouldn't I just focus on what's happening right now?
So again, I'll go back to the testosterone, which is one of my favorite examples, because testosterone can decline with age, of course. It tends to, not in all women, but in some women decline slower. Some women decline faster. But because it doesn't tend to just bottom out, this is another example of, well, I know I felt better in the upper quadrant, let's say. So now she's 45 and she says, I have all the symptoms, sounds like testosterone. And her practitioner says, you know what, I think it's time for you to go on testosterone, as an example. Great. She goes on testosterone. She's like, I'm not really noticing anything, because it only got her into the lower quadrant, whereas we know she felt her best at the upper quadrant. But what it can hold people back from is saying, but you're in range, so I don't want to give you any more. But she knows where she felt best. Now, a lot goes into that story. Don't don't think, like we're just talking about one marker in isolation. But even as women get older, does their estradiol decline? Yes. Does their progesterone decline? Yes. So if you're going to go on some sort of hormone, it's so helpful to know, like, what did you feel like when you felt your best? And maybe what were those levels? Now, I understand a 45-year-old and a 25-year-old are going to have very different levels, but I still want you to have optimal health. I don't want to just, as your physician, to look at the lab result very quickly when I get them back in the portal and go, oh yeah, you're in range. And then I send you a message, you're in range. Meanwhile, you're like, but I told you I'm having all these symptoms. I don't feel well. I don't so now what? Now what do we do? And so that's what my response back is if you feel great, then fantastic. If you don't feel great, then you're not in the right range.
And I just love this because really what we're talking today in so many ways is really about timing and timeline, right? Really understanding that it matters when you test, and it really matters that you're testing regularly so that you can understand how you're doing and what to do and what are the best options for you. And that is not something that we are conditioned to do as women in terms of our self-care, hormonal self-management. We're taught really to ignore and then wait for a crisis.
Yeah.
And then it's very hard to kind of dig out all the confusing data points at that time. So I love this. Take that away as you're listening. Timing, timeline, that's really, really special.
And even think of anomalies. How many times have you gotten a blood draw or any kind of test and something just is a little weird? Not like a disease state or anything, but your practitioner's like, have you always been high here? Have you always been low here? And you're like, I have no idea because I've never had my blood drawn. I don't know. And if you have timeline, I love that. You could go back and look and go, oh yeah, those are always whatever, a little high or a little low, but I feel fine. Like I've never worried about it. Or if it's something you're keeping an eye on, timeline. So that at 45, let's say cholesterol, prime example, you've always been a low cholesterol girly your whole life. You've been tracking it. Let's say you get it run every 5 years, just to be conservative. All of a sudden you hit 45 and you're suddenly a high cholesterol girly. But if you've never checked your cholesterol before, you don't know how much it jumped up. Was that a big jump? A little jump? Have you always been high? Like a familial thing and we just didn't know? Timeline is so important.
Yeah. And it also puts you in the position of being able to collaborate with your care provider to say, hey, I've got all this data for us to look at across thing. And it really helps them, give you better guidance, and it helps you advocate for yourself. So, I just love that so much. Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the Dutch test.
Oh, yeah.
You're the first medical director of the Dutch test. And for women who haven't heard of it, what does urine testing show you that blood testing simply can't, and who actually needs it?
So Dutch is an acronym. I will start with that. It stands for Dried Urine Test for Comprehensive Hormones. So you do urinate on these little strips of paper throughout the day, let them dry, and mail them back to the lab. And the concept behind urine, which is what made it so popular, are called metabolites. And basically, your hormones can't stay hormones forever. They have to break down and get out of the body. And the breakdown parts are called metabolites. So it's estrogen breaks down, that's a metabolite. But we have a few of them. Progesterone breaks down, it's a metabolite. Testosterone, cortisol, etc. So by seeing these metabolites, turns out research went, oh gosh, they are active. They also can bind to receptors and do the things. Some of it's good, some of it can cause problems. These metabolites might cause your acne, your hair growth in places you don't want, your hair loss, might worsen your PCOS. These metabolites may support your sleep, or if you don't have them, then you might sleep poorly. These metabolites with estrogen may potentially lead to some DNA damage, and we don't want that. So it's like, are you on that pathway or not? The cortisol metabolites, do you break down? Are you more like a very stress-based person? Are we more a relaxed person? I can see that. And so it's really nice to see, okay, I have your hormones and blood work, but then I can actually also see what your hormones are doing in urine and then where they're going. And the where they're going is great because just like anything, you have a lot of control over it. There's a lot we can do. If your estrogen is going down the pathway that might increase your risk for DNA damage, which we don't want, there are so many dietary and lifestyle things we can add into you to shift it. And that's amazing. But I won't know it unless I do the test.
And for somebody who's listening, you're bringing up this exciting concept of active hormone metabolites.
Mm-hmm.
But for most people, I think they look at the results of their Dutch test and say, okay, these metabolites represent what my hormone levels maybe had been during that time. Is that also something that is accurate for them to think?
Because they're in urine, it's what has come through the tissue and what's been used and broken down, et cetera, versus blood work is just what's floating around in your blood work. I don't know what's in your blood work, if it's actually getting to the place it needs to go, binding to the receptor and doing the thing. But I do know in urine, it's at least come through the tissue because that's the way that it works.
So you could look at the estradiol level on the Dutch test and say this person in her luteal phase is making an adequate amount of estrogen based on this metabolite.
Yes. And there's published data to show that the blood work and the urine testing correlate. So for example, it's not, the reference ranges are not the same, but for example, let's say you get a blood draw on day 20 and you do your urine test, your Dutch test the same day, then it will correlate. What's really nice about the Dutch test though, is that you collect 4, sometimes 5 times during the day, and they will do a weighted average. So remember in the way beginning, I mentioned pulses. So if you go to the lab in the morning and you miss your estrogen pulse, but it came later in the day, Dutch will pick that up. These 4-point urine tests will pick it up, and then they will do a weighted average of all points. So then you don't miss the pulse, which is nice.
That's really fantastic. I think, if you really want to be serious about understanding your hormones, what they're doing, and all the other robust things that the Dutch test can do, it's just such a great tool. Who would you say, besides someone who's like a biohacker and, or, who do you think should really consider a test like this?
So I often asked, do I start with blood work or do I start with a Dutch test? And I will say, of course, like anything, it depends on the person. It's very personalized. But this is my in general. In general, if you've never had blood work drawn before, or it's been a long time, and you're looking to get basics, you're looking to just dip your toe into it, then go get blood work done. That's fantastic. It's easy. It's convenient. Generally, your insurance covers it. Start there. You're more advanced, though. You're like, I'm having symptoms. I've had blood work. Nobody can figure out what's going on, or I'm ready for the next step. I don't feel well. I feel my hormones are a mess. I can't get pregnant, or my perimenopause, my PCOS, my PMS, my stress, my sleep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we're not dialing it in. I'm like, oh, then we need a lot more comprehensive of a test. Then let's do the Dutch test. You have the blood work. Let's get this advanced test.
I mean, I'm always with testing. I think this is a no-brainer for me. I think it's so helpful to see all of the ways that you're metabolizing things. Let's talk a little bit more about estrogen metabolites because they are something that most women haven't heard of. Why do they matter? When should somebody be looking at them?
When much like anything, I always say this, your hormones don't last forever. They have to break down. So when estrogen breaks down, unfortunately, it doesn't just go down a very clear shot pathway that's easy breezy out of the body. When estrogen breaks down, it either goes out through your intestines into your stool or out into your urine. But in between there are a lot of pathways it can choose. It's like a choose your own adventure that genetics and lifestyle determines. Why do I care? Because in some of these pathways, some of them are much better. We might consider them anti-cancer or anti-proliferative. So we'd prefer that pathway.
You're talking about methylation and COMT and some SNPs like that. Okay.
Even in the phase 1. So it's estrogen coming out of the body is a 2, if not 3 phase process. And so in the first phase, which mostly happens in the liver, it's called hydroxylation. We didn't name them. This is how they came named, but it's hydroxylation, and there's 3 pathways to choose from. One, when it keeps going, is considered anti-proliferative. One is considered more estrogenic, so it can worsen PMS, heavier periods, tender breasts. One can be considered genotoxic, meaning if it keeps going down that pathway uninhibited, it can bind to DNA and create holes, which of course we don't want because we don't want damage in our DNA.
Correct.
So by understanding this information, then we can look at the next phase 2, which is where we neutralize and make the estrogen water soluble so we can get rid of it. So how well do you do that? So this is when you get into genetics, again, COMT, COMT, or SULT, SULT. We have glucuronidation, UGT. So there are all these extra steps that we can take, the body is built in to help get rid of it. We have antioxidants that can help, like glutathione. We have a SNP called NQO1 that responds very well to organic broccoli sprouts. The active ingredient's called sulforaphane. So people are like, I love sprouts. I use glutathione. Like, this is great. I'm like, see, you're already helping your estrogen clear out the body in a much better manner. And there's a lot we can do to help direct this. So some women really want to know, just because these pathways, of course, influence their symptoms. Some want to know before they go on estrogen, if I add more estrogen to my system, which way am I going to clear it? What are my risks? And so we can use it for a variety of like healthy options for them.
I love that because, again, just women don't have visibility into this and aren't really seeing that there are dietary steps that need to be taken to support this process. And it's just so important. And you don't have to wait until there's a big problem to take action. And being proactive is really so critical.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think about these different, these three pathways that you talked about, and any sort of relevance on mitochondrial health. You know, you're talking about different ways that estrogen breaks down, and maybe some of the aspects, you know, the genotoxic aspects that are problematic. Are they also problematic from a mitochondrial perspective?
Absolutely. Oh, yes. And you know, I always say the mitochondria are like our little canaries in the coal mine. And sometimes I say that reference and I'm like, does that age me? Do people even know what that means anymore? But I think the Gen X and elder millennial know. But they're the alert system. And so if any of your hormone metabolism is not going well, it's not going in the direction that's maybe ideal and leading to more symptoms, that cycles right back to the health of the mitochondria and can feel like either little fires in the mitochondria or a big fire. It just like puts the mitochondria on fire, and then we have all sorts of issues. We have energy issues. We have, hormone creation issues. We have, the mitochondria do so much. So yes, absolutely. It goes hand in hand.
So it's really a vicious cycle that you want to get on top of, in terms of if you're noticing PMS symptoms, that's potentially a flag for you to think, I wonder how my estrogen is metabolizing.
Yes.
And if you're noticing along with PMS, that is, let's say, having a cyclical aspect, but you're having a general sense of fatigue and not feeling your best, that could be your mitochondria singing from the coal mine. And you want to kind of see that it's all connected. We don't talk about that enough either. So I'm really glad to bring that forward.
Yeah.
All right. There's so much for women to be doing. Let's break things down by decade, maybe to help reduce the overwhelm. So for women in their 20s, I would say this audience probably thinks that labs are something to worry about later.
Yep.
What do you think every woman in her 20s should keep on her radar? Is there anything that she should proactively test for?
I honestly, a lot of the things that I said, including hormones, because I understand some people are like, you're in your 20s. Why would you check your hormones? You're so young. I'm like, let's know now. At least once or twice in your 20s, even if you feel fantastic, like let's at least just see where you are. Everything I just mentioned, I think it's great as a baseline if we can, because I want to know and I don't want to miss anything. And unfortunately, as you know, I find that there are a lot of women in their 20s who are not doing well. There are a lot of women in their 20s who are being told, oh, you're too young for that. I had a woman, 23, 24, who was having hot flashes. Her doctor said, you're too young for hot flashes. I said, no, any woman at any age can have hot flashes. It doesn't mean you're perimenopausal or menopausal, but it does mean we have an estrogen issue or what we call a thermoregulation, so temperature sensing issue in the brain. There's something going on creating your hot flashes. Let's figure it out. And so that's why I appreciate labs even in your 20s. And also, it sets you up for success for later.
But also, I think it's the other big thing that I always like to say is, when we're in our 20s, we think we have all of this time with our hormones ahead.
Yes.
But, 35 is when the official ovarian aging clock begins to start ticking faster. But it starts that aging journey essentially from the beginning, right? As soon as you start ovulating in puberty, you are now on the clock.
Yes.
And so you want to be
on top of what's happening in your 20s in case there is something off. And as like you've said, so many women are struggling with hormone problems right out the gate of puberty that create that vicious cycle between hormones, metabolism, mitochondria, the ovary. And that's not going to be putting you on a good trajectory long term. So you're suffering in your 20s. If you're not getting your labs tested, that's only going to get more problematic in your 30s. And then things are going to go rapidly more in the wrong direction. So test for sure. I agree. Test in your 20s. Okay. Moving into the 30s, this is often when things start shifting in ways women don't expect, right? What changes about how you approach testing in this decade, and what are some early signals that you're looking for that most doctors would wave off?
So in the 30s, depending on your symptoms, this is when I would probably start to add in more of the lipid information, cholesterol, and maybe advanced cholesterol markers, depending on how old you are, what's going on, family history. I may start adding in the inflammatory markers here. Again, depending on how old you are, what symptoms are going on. I might start adding in more of the autoimmune markers. Again, depending on your symptoms and how you're feeling. Because if your 20s were a rough one, and then you hit your 30s, just as you said, 35, the things age faster. And I always say it's not necessarily, it's not like, oh my gosh, it's only about having a baby, because a lot of women don't want to have children. But what I say is, remember, your female body is designed around reproduction, whether you want to or not. That's what it's built around. And so your menstrual cycle, ovulation, it's the fifth vital sign, as so many people say. And if you've been ignoring it in your 20s and then you hit your 30s and you're like, man, I am not feeling that great, whether you're trying to get pregnant or not, it is so important to your general health, the health of your ovaries, the health of your cycle, the health of your hormones. So here I start to add in a few extra things depending on what's going on and what your goals are.
Yeah, fifth vital sign, I think that can't be underscored enough, because women don't know that that's actually been a new update from the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, that we have to consider our cycle and its performance a fifth vital sign alongside things like blood pressure and temperature, things that we know to take seriously. We should feel the same way about our period. Obviously, if you're listening to my show, you know that I've been saying that for a long time.
For a long time.
I love that Dr. Carrie backed me up there. Okay. All right, you have such a vivid way of describing perimenopause as this unconscious uncoupling, which I love. This is like a rewiring that happens sometimes, against our will, right? Some women look forward to the end, other women don't. How does that biological shift show up in lab work, and what does the picture look like for women in their 40s and beyond that's different from what came before?
When we all remember puberty, for the most part, we all remember going through puberty, everything was wiring up. Our reproductive cycle was wiring up all the hormones, the ability to make hormones. And then those hormones touch on every single system of the body. So it was a little bit rough, or a lot of it rough, in our teenage years. Now we're backing out of it. So all those wired up things that were wired are unwiring, because we are headed towards menopause. So eventually, when we don't have a cycle and are not reproductive anymore. And then those hormones are shifting as well, because as the wires are going away, getting rewired differently, we don't make progesterone like we did. We sometimes make too much estrogen, then not enough estrogen, then too much estrogen, then not enough. We skip cycles. We get 2 cycles in a month, and eventually we skip again. And then sort of eventually everything goes low. Well, if your entire system, from the top of your head to the bottom of your toes, we're used to estrogens, estradiol, used to progesterone. Suddenly it's looking around like a coworker who just didn't show up to work, and you're like, where are they? Why aren't they here? And then the job still, like, things are still coming to it. Emails are happening, like their projects are due, but yet they're not responding. And so what happens? Things in the business fall apart. You get stressed out. You have to take on more. It's the same thing in the body. Estrogen and progesterone, if you choose not to go on hormones, aren't there. So now the immune system's involved, the brain's involved, your neurologic system gets involved, the skin gets like your digestive tract can get involved. Everybody's
it affects
involved.
Everything.
People, and this is what blows people's minds, because they're like, oh, that's just around my ovaries, right? That's just my uterus. I'm like, well, that's one system. You have 11 more. So everything can get involved, which is why some women in their 40s are like, why am I having balance issues or ringing in my ears or itchy ears? And yet my sister is having constipation, heartburn, and hot flashes. I'm like, right, because it depends on the person and the system that can be involved. So as a result, this can really impact your lab work. It can worsen your thyroid, your lipids, cholesterol, your glucose, your insulin, your red and white blood cells, how you do or don't absorb things, so iron, B12. So this is why, for sure, at the very least, if you were listening in your 40s, go get blood work done. Because you may have had it done in your 30s and identified as everything was normal. And now in your 40s, the amount of women who tell me, oh my gosh, on my 45th birthday, everything fell apart. All of a sudden I had high cholesterol. All of a sudden I had high glucose. Like I didn't even feel it coming on. It just came on. But they didn't change anything. They didn't change their workout routines. They didn't change their diet. They didn't change their job. They didn't change their family, but yet everything on the inside changed. I'm like, oh yes, it's puberty in reverse. And it can show up in blood work.
That's so important what you just said there about they hadn't changed anything. And one of the things that I talk a lot about is that there is a sense of timing around how you care for yourself and the way that you took, let's say your practices around diet and lifestyle and exercise in your 30s definitely need to change in your 40s. And so sometimes, because that's not a normalized conversation, we just think it's born out of this the lack of including women's cycles in research, right? So we've been conditioned to think, well, we can just do the same self-care day in and day out, which is first and fundamentally the flawed part of the foundation. You can't do that. I now have a study that shows that that's true. And second, we then think, oh, we can also do the same things across our lifespan, which is not true. So what's great about doing labs in your 40s is you'll see in black and white, oh, my cholesterol's up, things are not getting the support that they need inside of all these body systems. And I now it's mandatory for me to change my diet and lifestyle and self-care and fitness to support that. Because whatever you get back as far as the labs, let's say you have high cholesterol, what are you going to do about that? Yes, you could go on a medication, but most people want to avoid that. So you're going to make diet and lifestyle changes, right? And so that can be a proper motivation for you. And labs, I think, can be, again, seeing it in black and white really helps people get that push that they need to start doing the things that, you could also start doing them before you get your labs.
100%.
And then you could have a lab result that's like, everything's great. That's another reality too. Like, let's also just let you know as a listener that you could start making the changes that we're going to be talking about on the show. And you could go get your labs tested at 45 and be like, you're great.
Yeah.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Look at this in black and white. You're getting an A+ on your self-care. That's the other value of a lab. It doesn't always have to tell you bad news. It could tell you that what you're doing is working and support your commitment to your self-care practices.
And I think it's important too to talk even about the future. Sometimes I know I'm in my 40s and I sometimes have to remind myself like that's a grandmother issue. Like, oh, that's like years from now. Like that's what, osteoporosis, that's what grandmas deal with. I'm not there yet. But when we talk about longevity for women, which of course we talk about differently than for men, but for women, heart disease is still a big thing. We have we call it the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but 4 horsewomen of the apocalypse. So cardiometabolic disease. Yes, I want to address your symptoms now, but also I don't want you to die of heart disease in the future. We talk about frailty. Yes, I want your symptoms now, but I also don't want you to fall and break a hip when you're older. We talk about neurodegenerative. So yes, I want to address your brain now, but also I don't want you to develop dementia in the future. And then cancer. I want to reduce your cancer risk as much as possible. So again, as a practitioner, I'm thinking you as a woman today and what you're going through, but I'm also thinking like, oh gosh, at 35, your cholesterol's not great. Your glucose is getting high. Your inflammatory markers are high. So I automatically know today's not good, but also you have a higher risk in the future of the heart disease, the frailty, the neurodegenerative, and possibly the cancer. Let's not check those boxes off. Let's rewind off the cliff and be proactive about it now, because the future comes faster than you think. Time seems to move a lot faster as we get older, and I don't want you to have any of those issues if I can prevent them now.
Yeah. Health is habits over time, and disease does not happen overnight in the body. So everything that you just said, I could not agree more with. Let's just talk a little bit also in the 40s about how testing hormones and getting those labs done can really help you adjust and titrate any kind of BHRT that you're doing. because that's another kind of, it's like the wild, wild west of prescribing hormone replacement, and
Yes.
women look at it as like this panacea moment, like, okay, I'm just going to go on HRT or bioidentical HRT and I don't have to do anything different. And then they also question like, well, I'm on the HRT, but I still feel all of these symptoms and how can we use labs to help us navigate this confusing, unregulated situation?
Now, the guidelines will say to go on hormones, you don't have to do any kind of lab testing. What they mean is around estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So you don't technically have to have labs for that. We absolutely advocate for all the other labs we talked about, inflammation and cholesterol and iron and vitamin D and thyroid and all of those. Please still get your labs done there. However, I am a pro lab person. I still think, especially in early perimenopause when women are still generally cycling pretty regularly, I would like to see a snapshot of what's going on, or I would like to do one of those everyday tests we talked about and get an idea of what's happening day to day. How wild are the swings? How high are the swings? How low are the swings? Like, what is happening here? Then I do run that marker we talked about a while ago called FSH, because FSH tends to rise 3 to 7 years before you actually cross through the door of menopause. So now I like to really keep an eye on FSH to see if it's creeping higher and higher. So in full disclosure, last month, I think, I ran my FSH on day 3 of my cycle. And because I'm in the world of lab testing, I test my hormones often, a lot, routinely. And I'll be 49 this year. I still cycle regularly.
Same. 2 months.
I'm June. Wait,
I'm a May baby.
You're a May baby. Oh my gosh. Are you a Taurus or a Gemini?
Taurus.
I'm a Gemini. So I still cycle. And so I ran an FSH. Girl, my FSH was 20. I was like, no.
Oh, yes.
I'm that much closer. But if I hadn't tested, I wouldn't have known. So for everyone listening, once you cross into the double digits, then we know that your follicular reserve is down. And once you cross over 25, and some labs say over 30, then you're like that much closer to menopause, if not menopausal. But what's super fascinating is all the research around that hormone FSH. So we know it with fertility or PCOS, but now they're like, oh, wait, it's not a one-trick pony of a lab marker. It turns out the higher the FSH is, they're starting to do research finally for women to go, maybe it's related to more bone loss and fracture risk. Maybe it's related to brain health or deterioration. I saw an article yesterday about FSH and cancer markers for breast cancer. Now, again, we're early in the research. It's not absolute. But as I'm seeing more and more of these labs go, FSH seems to be more than just a stimulating hormone. It turns out it can bind to receptors all over and impact the body. So if you are on estrogen, that will suppress or reduce FSH and might improve those outcomes. So if you choose to go on estrogen, I am going to check your FSH. I'm going to see if we can get your FSH down while we get your estradiol up. And again,
was hoping you were going to say
very
this.
forefront things. It's very precision hormone things. It's not absolute. Don't take this as the gospel, but I'm encouraging all my colleagues, like, start checking FSH and your women over 40. Let's keep an eye on this.
But especially when you're finally, if you do choose to onboard, estrogen replacement, you should know what your starting FSH is before the replacement.
Yes.
And you should see an improvement in that FSH number. All the potential soon-to-be more research benefits aside, just seeing that number comes down is showing that estrogen is having some efficacy, whatever dose you're getting. So the inverse is also true. If you're getting a dose and you're not seeing any improvement in that FSH level, it's not the right dose. And so make sure you advocate for that test, because it's a way for you to check, is this really going to help me, this estrogen level, or not? Because sometimes it feels very random because they're not testing. So I love that.
Dose or route. I see in the comment section, a lot of women will argue about, I had this pharmacist who was like, estrogen absorbs very well transdermally. So as a gel, or especially a gel, but even the patch, for example. And the number of women that were like, not for me, my FSH didn't budge. I felt terrible. Like, it didn't really work. I had to switch to something else. And I was like, yes, we're all different. So these key clinical pearls are so helpful. So if somebody is listening or is on hormones and they're like, yeah, mine's not working, but they keep telling me to stick it out or just try a higher dose, like, I might not be absorbing it. You might not be absorbing it. If
it's not in your
topical.
head. It's not in your head. It's going to be in your labs, though.
Yes, exactly.
And the more you test, the better you can adjust.
Yes.
Okay. A lot of women, I have like two more questions. A lot of women listening, obviously, unfortunately, have had the experience of being dismissed or gaslit or told to come back in a year. What's your actual advice for walking into a doctor's office and advocating for the labs that you need, especially when the doctor isn't trained?
So the first thing I always say is, if you have an animal, you have a dog, and you took it to a vet and the vet dismissed everything you said, what's the first thing you would do? You would find a new vet. Same for a pediatrician. If you took your child to a pediatrician and the pediatrician blew you off, dismissed you, didn't think of what, you would be like, thank you, but no thank you, I'm leaving and find a pediatrician who can help me. It's the same for you. You can build multiple people in your clinical care team. And if the person you're talking with doesn't believe you, isn't interested, not open-minded about it, not helping you, it's totally okay to say, thank you for your time. Doesn't seem like you're a good fit, and we can find somebody else. However, what is helpful is definitely asking the front desk. I'm coming in to talk about hormones. Is this person trained? Is this person going to be open-minded? What do you think? Because the front desk is going to know immediately. They're going to be like, oh, no, we don't, that's not their area. Let me send you to somebody else. Or, oh, yes, they're open-minded about it. Then you're going to come prepared. You're going to be listening to this podcast and taking notes so that when you come in, you're going to go, I'm here to talk about my hormones, whatever age bracket you're in. And you're going to have your questions ready to go, what lab work you would like to have run and why. And you can advocate for yourself, just like you would advocate for your dog or cat, just like you would advocate for your child. It's the same thing.
I love that. Someone who's listening to this right now, she's exhausted. She's been told everything is normal. She doesn't know where to start. What's the very first thing you'd tell her to do?
Listen to this podcast again.
Take notes.
Take notes, exactly. Because I think, again, like, check your lab work. Did they just run the basics that we said earlier? Did they just run a metabolic panel, maybe your cholesterol and a red and white blood cell, and call it good? Or did they actually get into the details of hormones? Did they test you at the appropriate time? Did they even talk to you about your menstrual cycle or the age that you're at, or what, if you are a perimenopausal and looking at this? Did they ask you about things like family history and what's going on in your life and stress? And if they didn't do any of that but the very basics, then you actually didn't get a very good workup, and it's time to actually get you a good workup so that you can feel better.
All right, rapid fire. So like 1-2 word answers are fine here, okay? One lab result doctors call normal that you would flag every single time.
Oh, insulin.
Most underrated hormone to test and most overrated.
I think the most underrated to test is testosterone, because the reference range goes down to 0.
Mm-hmm.
What the heck? And I think the most overrated is when they check progesterone in the wrong part of the cycle.
Love it. Best time in your cycle to get your blood drawn?
If you're doing all the labs we mentioned, then we want to be about 5 to 7 days after a confirmed ovulation.
Dutch test or blood panel, when does each one win?
The blood test wins when you have not had blood work in a while and you're just looking to get a really good overview. When you need more comprehensive, go for a Dutch test.
One thing you wish every general practitioner knew about women's hormone labs?
That they cycle, that they do change a little bit every day, but we know this, and there's a lot that can be done. So test appropriately and it's not scary to test hormones and to talk to women about their hormones and their menstrual cycle.
We can handle it. We're ready.
Yes, we want to. Women are chomping at the bit to talk about their hormones.
Because we just want to feel good. And it's long overdue that we have the tools and the information to help us live healthier, to take care of our symptoms better, and to end a lot of unnecessary hormonal suffering, which is really why we're here today talking about things. So, Dr. Carrie, thank you so much for joining me on our first guest episode of the Ovary Club. You did not disappoint as expected, and I hope we can have you back to talk again. This was awesome, ladies. I hope you listen to this and again and take notes. Carrie, how can people follow you, find you, get more access to all the resources and wonderful things you have to offer?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Absolutely love your work and absolute joy to talk to you about on your podcast, be the first guest, and just continue to help educate. You can find everything I do on my website, drcarriejones.com, including I have a number of free ebooks. I have an estrogen detox free ebook. I have a labs free ebook. So if you go to drcarriejones.com/learn, you can sign up for all of them, get them for free. And you can find me on Instagram at dr.carriejones. YouTube, and I have my own podcast because, much like you, I just want to give all the free information out there for education.
You got to tune in. It's such a great show. I loved our chat. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody follow Dr. Carrie on IG and download those resources. They are going to be so helpful to your journey of getting labs, understanding your results, and taking better care of yourself. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for another episode of the Ovary Club. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and like the show and share it with your friends. This is how we're going to help women feel better by spreading the word.